I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon.
Now, in order to get there, we have to teach the dog what behaviors we want, and we need to make behaviors that aren't inherently valuable to the dog, valuable to the dog. That is where operant conditioning comes in. So, operant conditioning requires an operator, i.e., you and me. Okay? So operant conditioning requires an operator. In operant conditioning, we are assigning value, either reinforcing value or punishing value, to particular behaviors in order to teach the dog what it is that we want long term. In operant conditioning, there are essentially 4 quadrants in operant conditioning. So there are 4 ways that this information gets translated to our dogs. Okay? And in those 4 quadrants, you've got 2 quadrants that are reinforcement, and then you've got 2 quadrants that are punishment. Then you have 2 quadrants that are positive in nature and 2 quadrants that are negative in nature. Okay, so oftentimes this diagram confuses people, because we have plus R plus P minus R minus P. Okay? Let's define the terms. That'll be super helpful in understanding how this works. So we want to use a reinforcer if we want to increase the chance of the behavior returning. We want to use a punisher if we want to decrease the chance of the behavior returning. And then the simple definition, plus means to add, minus means to remove. Okay, so this should help clear up a lot of things for a lot of people who have looked at this before and didn't really know what it meant. So plus R, or positive reinforcement, doesn't mean good reinforcement, which is what a lot of people think it means, right? So this doesn't mean good reinforcement. This means to add something in order to increase the likelihood the behavior returns, okay? Because it's a reinforce. So we're increasing the likelihood the behavior returns. On the flip side, positive punishment means to add something that decreases the likelihood of the behavior returning. Okay? Negative punishment means we would remove something to decrease the likelihood of a behavior returning. And negative reinforcement means we're going to remove something to increase the likelihood of a behavior returning. So let's give some examples. Okay? So let's talk through some examples of plus R, positive reinforcement, okay? Some examples of positive reinforcement are what? Food reward, praise, toy, freedom, and any number of things we can add to the dog in order to increase the likelihood of the behavior returning again. Okay, so we tell the dog to sit, we tell the dog they did a great job, we give them a treat that is a positive reinforcer. By producing that treat, we are going to increase the likelihood that next time we stay sit, the dog sits. Now, unfortunately, there's a reason there are 4 quadrants and not just 1. Because animals are not built to learn in a single quadrant, period. That's not how nature teaches. That's not how things work in the wild. In the wild, in canine life, so dog to dog, there is very little positive reinforcement that exists beyond about 16 to 20 weeks of age, so 4 to 5 months. Once they reach that point, the large majority of their life operates in the negative quadrants, meaning if I don't hunt, I suffer the consequences of not hunting. If I don't procreate, I suffer the consequences of not procreating. So it's a lot of negatives, right? Things being taken away from them. Not a whole lot of positives in things being added to them because there's not an outside operator. They're operating against nature, okay? So let's draw an example of positive punishment. Positive punishment would be a leash correction. Admonishing your dog. Negative talk that they don't like. We are not an advocate for hitting your animal, but that would be a positive punishment. Okay, so those are multiple different positive punishments. If we think about it in terms of child rearing, a positive punishment in child rearing would be spanking. And I know, again, we're back to these whole like positive and punish terms. Positive simply means to add. Punish means to decrease the likelihood of a behavior returning. So, positive punishment, I am adding a sensation in order to decrease the likelihood of the behavior returning. Hang on real quick. Hey, you guys, can we chill? We're making too much noise. Very exciting, I know. Sorry, I had to have a conversation with the hooligans. They were not very understanding. They're probably going to be back at it in a minute as soon as they hear me talking in here. So, in general, the majority of nature teaches in the negative quadrants. Dogs tend to understand the negative quadrants as good or better than they do the positive quadrants. So, let's talk about a negative punishment. What would a negative punishment be? So in child rearing, negative punishment would be like a timeout or grounding. We're removing something. We're removing freedom. We're removing playtime. We're removing something in order to decrease the likelihood that behavior happens next time. So kid talks back to mom. Mom goes, go stand in the corner. That's a negative punishment in psychology, okay? Negative reinforcement is probably the toughest of all four for humans to wrap their head around. And the primary reason is because it literally means to remove something in order to increase the likelihood of a behavior returning. Now, this is not a perfect example, but it works and it helps people wrap their heads around it. The most common negative reinforcer, one of the most common negative reinforcers that humans experience in their day-to-day life, and again, not a perfect example, but it works, is your seatbelt alarm in your car, okay? So your seatbelt alarm in your car doesn't actually cause any overwhelming fear or anxiety. But when you get in your car and you don't immediately do the right thing, your car begins to apply a pressure to you. Okay, that pressure is in the form of an audible alarm. Once you make the right decision and do the thing that it's trying to get you to do, your car then removes that annoyance. And if you've ever, I'm guilty of it, I'm sure most of you guys are, that annoying beeping, and then you put the seatbelt on, and as soon as that seatbelt clicks, it's like, thank God it's gone. That response, that relief, that sigh, is actually a small dopamine release that happens at the relieval of that pressure. That is how you can remove something and it be reinforcing. Okay? So in that instance, your car annoyed you into making the right decision. Once you made the right decision, the car immediately removed pressure from you. That removal of pressure created a sense of relaxation and a small hit of dopamine. Now, the way that we train dogs is we use negative reinforcement followed by positive reinforcement. So all behaviors will then receive 2 dopamine dumps instead of just 1. If all I do is positively reinforce a behavior, I'm only associating 1 major dopamine dump with every reward cycle. What I'm hoping to do in stacking both negative and positive reinforcement is create both a dopamine dump at the relieval of pressure and then a second one at the application of the mark and reward. So, simple kind of concept when I'm teaching a sit, and we're going to go way deeper into this, but I'm just going to give you surface level right now. Right? Once I have the dog understanding that they can get paid by sitting, right? That's step number one. They got to understand they can get paid. Once they understand they can get paid from sitting, then I take the leash and I apply a very slight upward pressure to the lead as I give the command. Not after, because I'm not punishing for not doing. I'm applying a pressure that motivates the behavior to be done faster so that I can relieve that pressure, create a sense of relief for the dog, and then immediately stack another dopamine release on top of that with food. Right? So I'm double reinforcing each behavior. So, sit, slight pressure applied. Dog sits, pressure immediately gets released. Then I tell the dog they're correct, and I pay them with food. Now, stacking 2 dopamine releases on every individual behavior. Here's why that is so important. To go back to a negative reinforcer, I'm stacking both dopamine releases from both types of reinforcement on top of each other. Okay? Now, here's the reason I'm doing that. If I teach using positive reinforcement only, okay? So, dog does, I pay. Dog does, I pay. Dog does, I pay. We do that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Dog does, I pay. The behavior of sitting never actually becomes valuable to the dog. Sitting is only a bridge to get the valuable thing. So sitting itself doesn't actually have a dopamine release associated with it. So it can only rise in value for the dog so much. When I add negative reinforcement in front of the behavior, I am now creating value in the position of sitting apart from the food, because sitting reduces pressure for the dog. So it makes a slightly uncomfortable pressure go away. So now, not only does sitting have its own inherent value, but it is now also a bridge to another valuable thing. So we're taking and stacking 2 different sources of relief or positive neurotransmitters onto this individual behavior. So the negative reinforcer followed by the positive reinforcer. The second reason teaching in the negative reinforcement quadrant is so important is the way these quadrants are designed. In order to understand the opposite quadrant, you must understand the reinforcer quadrant first. So, for instance, let's take a look right here. So these quadrants are actually used in catty corners to each other. So the natural opposite of positive reinforcement is negative punishment. I can give or I cannot give. Okay? So I tell you to sit, you do the right thing, I give. I tell you to sit, you don't do the right thing, I don't give. So I remove. Okay? So that is the natural opposite of positive reinforcement is negative punishment. The same holds true on the other axis. The natural opposite of negative reinforcement is positive reinforcement. I remove something in order to increase the likelihood of a behavior. So I'm teaching you to respond that when you feel slight discomfort, your response is to do the right thing. When you do the right thing, that discomfort goes away. If I have not shown the animal that they are in control of pressure and discomfort and they can make it go away or stay, then if I just start leash popping them for doing the wrong thing, I am communicating in a language I have not shown them. If all I've used is positive reinforcement, and then I jump to positive punishment, I taught them everything in English and then started screaming at them in Chinese. Because I did not teach them the natural opposite quadrant of positive punishment. So in order to have complete behavior with a dog, and a dog that understands and respects both boundaries and understands very much so how to get paid for doing the right thing, the dog must understand all 4 quadrants of how information is passed along. So, that's the essential rundown of dog training fundamentals, classical versus operant conditioning. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about within this individual module. Here, let's pull this up, make sure you guys can get a good look at it before I erase it. Ka-chow. Take a picture, take a screenshot. Whatever. All right, moving on. One of the things that I see missed a lot is defining what is a reinforcement and what is a punishment. Now, this is kind of a trick question because if I ask most people what a reinforcement is or a reward is for a dog, they're going to say things like food, treats, praise, attaboy, affection, whatever. Here's the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is you don't get to decide what a reinforcement is for your dog. You also don't get to decide what a punishment is for your dog. Only the dog can decide that. Here's a perfect example. Let's say you have just decided in your head that broccoli is going to be your dog's reward. But your dog hates broccoli. It's not a reinforcement, no matter how much you shove it in your dog's throat. It is not a reinforcement if it's not naturally reinforcing to the dog. In human terms, I personally can't have ice cream. I don't handle cow's milk dairy very well. For me, ice cream makes me sick. For you, ice cream might be the most wonderful reward in the whole world. So one cannot just say, oh, ice cream, positive reinforcement. Not for me, bro. Going to be a punishment for me. So the thing we have to remember is that the animal decides both what is reinforcing and what is punishing. And the way you can tell, so on both of these, the animal decides. You don't get to decide. I don't care if you think your dog should like bologna. If they don't like bologna, they don't like bologna. The animal decides what is reinforcing and what is punishing. Now, are there certain things that we know in our work with dogs that we can consistently get to the point where the dog understands as reinforcement? Absolutely. Like one of those things is food. Why do we know that? Okay, the freaking light shining on this thing, you're driving me nuts. Okay, why do we know that food can be a consistent reinforcer? Because food is a primary means of survival for the animal. So if they get into a position where they cannot get food except through working, then work will become the natural outcome for gaining the food. So it's very easy to kind of artificially manipulate food drive in a dog. Now, please hear me. I am not advocating for starving a dog to bring food drive up. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is teaching a dog a proper response to the presence of food and the removal of food. Dogs should inherently not love it if food goes away. Dogs should inherently like it if food becomes present because that is a natural survival mechanism for the dog. The same holds true with punishment with a dog. If you issue what you believe is a punishment, so let's say your dog's being reactive and you pop them on the prong collar, right? And they just pull through it and they react again. Was that punishment? And the answer is no, it was not a punishment. Because the way you determine whether something is a reinforcer or a punishment is, does it change the outcome? Right? So operant conditioning is not a series of levers that you pull to get dogs to do things. It's an observance of the outcome. So if when I give my dog food, it increases the likelihood they do the thing next time, then yes, it was a reinforcer because the outcome is observable, right? The behavior increased in likelihood. Same thing with punishment. If my dog barks at another dog and I tap my dog on the collar, and when I tap my dog on the collar, next time we pass the dog, he doesn't bark, then it was an accurate punishment because it decreased the likelihood of the behavior returning. So ultimately, did it work or did it not work is your gauge as to whether the dog views it as a reinforcer or a punisher. It either increased the chance of behavior returning or it decreased the chance of behavior returning. If it did neither, it doesn't exist in either category. Let me give you a perfect example, just a little anecdotal example. I brought a dog over from Hungary a couple of years ago. Big, powerful Dutch male working dog, right? Trained up for the PH1, whole 9 yards. Great dog, very strong personality type and very dominant personality type. When I got him, the former owner told me, he was like, hey, just FYI, probably going to need to feed him through a muzzle for the first couple of weeks till he learns to trust you. And be careful with his down. He's sticky with his down. Sometimes he'll nail you when you tell him to down. So I get the dog here. I've got him in a muzzle, so I'm safe, and I'm working him with food, and we're having a good time. And I tell the dog, I give the dog the Dutch command for down, which is off, AUF, right? So I tell him off. And as I tell him off, I watch every hair on the back of his shoulders bristle up, and he cuts his eyes up at me, like, you about to make me, big boy, or are we going to tangle? So then come to find out that the way he had been trained to down was they would give him the off command and then smack him in the back of the head with a water hose. So in his brain, the connection that was created is that this word equals fight from the handler. And he was a strong enough dog, and he was comfortable with fighting, so that's the choice that he made. So the question is, in that dog's version of training, which please understand I am not advocating for, that's not how I train. In that dog's version of training, was the water hose to the head a punishment? The answer is no, it was not, because it did not change the outcome of the behavior. It did not change what happens next. What it was a cue to fight now. And so it was not a punishment for not downing. It was a cue to get in a fight with your handler. All I did to solve the problem, went back to food and changed the command, because the dog had such a hard ingrained response to the word off that I just changed it to down and paid him with food, and then he had a beautiful down and we never had an issue with it. So punishment and reinforcement are in the eye of the beholder. They are in the eye of the animal. The animal will tell you whether that behavior is punishing or reinforcing to them, whether your stimulus is punishing or reinforcing. You have to watch the animal, you have to watch how the animal responds, and you have to adjust accordingly. If you think your pop on the collar is a punishment for your dog, but your dog continues the behavior, your dog is very clearly telling you it's not a punishment. When you apply force to a dog without affecting change, you're just applying force for the sake of applying force. That is animal abuse. It is important to understand, if you need to correct a behavior, we need to make sure we are using a communication style and a methodology that for that animal actually communicates what we need. When I see people walking down the street and their dog pulls them and they pop their collar and they come back, and the dog goes up, they pop them, they come back, and they go up again, they pop them, they come back. I have to think to myself, by the end of that walk, they have probably popped that dog 200 times on that prong collar or that slip lead or that e-collar. Why would they rather do it 200 times than do it one time with a level of intensity that the dog registers as a consequence for what they were doing? So instead of knock it off and being serious about it as the leader, they go, hey, stop, 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 stop. Which one do you think destroys trust faster? Death by 1,000 cuts, or clarity in what we're looking for and a one and done communication with the dog? So again, what is the punishment? Whatever the dog tells you it is. What is the reinforcement? Whatever the dog tells you it is. How do you know whether it's a punishment or reinforcement? If it's a reinforcement, the behavior will increase the likelihood of happening again. If it's a punishment, the behavior will decrease its likelihood of happening again. That's the real simple explanation, and this is missed by so many people. Even professional trainers oftentimes don't understand these two concepts. So anyway, that is reinforcement and punishment and how they are defined by the animal. So, okay, so we're going to dive a little bit more into operant conditioning. So remember we talked about reinforcement and punishment quadrants, what they are: positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. Let's dive in a little bit into what can fit within these individual quadrants and what they're primarily used for. So let's talk first in the positive reinforcement quadrant. So what could be a positive reinforcer for a dog? Food could be, a toy could be, praise could be, heck, even water can be, if a dog really loves drinking water or swimming in water. Exercise can be, so like going for a walk, running, playing. Freedom. Lots of things can be a positive reinforcer for a dog. But what is the goal of a positive reinforcer? The goal of a positive reinforcer very, very clearly is to teach. Positive reinforcers are designed to help the dog learn something new by associating something beneficial to them with the novel or neutral stimulus that we need them to now understand. Okay? So, those are examples of what a positive reinforcement can be. Let's look at examples of what a negative reinforcement can be. Negative reinforcement can be physical pressure, so like leash pressure. It can be verbal or audible pressure. Spatial pressure. Closing in on their space, moving into their area. Like a lot of times you'll see trainers, they'll do that. If a dog breaks the sit or lays down, they'll step into the dog. Or if the dog comes off place, they'll step into the dog to get the dog to go back on place. That's all a form of negative reinforcement. That is spatial pressure being applied to the dog, right? And again, what is negative reinforcement used to do? It is used to teach because it is a reinforcer. Now, why wouldn't we want to just use negative reinforcement? Because if all we do is use negative reinforcement, we are going to get flat behavior, meaning the dog is not going to be motivated or excited to work. They will do it out of obligation, but it won't be fun. When we're using positive reinforcement, we get drive and excitement for the behavior. But it's all just in motivation. It's not in any level of obligation. So to have a very, very well-behaved dog, you need both motivation and obligation. So let's take a look at it here. And let's look at this. Let's call this dog 100% reliable, which these are thinking, breathing creatures. There's no such thing as 100% reliable, okay? But a dog that is fully trained, super reliable, they're going to be operating 80%. Oh, look at my terrible art skills. 80% out of motivation and 20% obligation. Okay, I want to. I have to. Now, you can get pretty dang close to a fully trained dog with just using motivation, but you'll never be able to get all the way there because doing the behavior is all based off the animal's motivation at that individual moment, which means there's no obligation to have to do it if they don't feel motivated. Now, this really only requires 20% of the work in dog training. It is easier to use just motivation for behavior than it is to also instill the obligation in the dog. If we're also instilling in obligation, that is 80% of the work in dog training, right? So it's like the 80-20 rule, right? That 80% of your efforts come from 20% of your work, and 80% of your work creates 20% of your efforts. Same concept here, but it's with motivation and obligation. Most people in their dog training journey get here. Very few people actually take it to the obligation part where the dog is always doing the behavior every single time, regardless of motivation in that individual moment. And if you have a dog that works 80% in their motivation and doesn't have obligation, you're going to have an excited, driving, fun dog to work, but it won't be reliable when the crap hits the fan, so to speak. So catching that obligation part is a huge deal, right? Very easy way to look at this is want to, have to, right? I want my dog to want to sit when I tell them to sit. However, I also want them to understand that it is not an option. You also must do it, okay? So when we look at our negative reinforcer is what helps create that obligation because doing the behavior relieves pressure for the dog. Therefore, they understand if I don't do the behavior, there's inherent pressure involved. Now, let's talk about positive punishment. So positive punishment quadrant. What are some things that can be positive punishment? Well, physical pressure, audible pressure, spatial pressure. That's crazy. It's all the same things that are in negative reinforcement. Remember earlier when I said that these quadrants always work together in the catty-corner areas, right? It's always the same thing. So the difference is the perception of the individual pressure at that moment. So if we take a look at it, and we take a look at it just like on a little diagram, okay? So we got a diagram, ta-da, ta-da, we got pressure down here, and we have the perception of pressure here. Okay? Usually what it's going to look like is it's going to be on kind of an exponential curve. Art skills getting better, man. Look at it. All right. So let's say we use something like leash pressure, like a physical pressure. Okay? Within leash pressure, you have everything from enough pressure to pull a petal off of a flower to enough pressure to really injure a dog, right? And everything in between, right? This tool can be used for all sorts of craziness or all sorts of good, totally up to the user, okay? So even if we talk about like leash corrections, like pops for doing bad behavior, you've got small pops, medium pops, big pops, right? You can do all three of those. At some point, and this is going to vary wildly per dog, because remember, what a punisher is, whether something is reinforcing or punishing, is in the eye of the animal. We don't get to choose, they choose. So at some point along this graph, let's pick a different color. With leash pressure, let's call it leash pressure. My handwriting is awesome. Okay, at some point along this graph, that leash pressure is going to change over from being a negative reinforcer to being a positive punisher. And that point varies wildly per dog, and it is on their perception of the sensation. You don't decide that this pop is positive punishment, but it's negative reinforcement this time. The dog will tell you, based off of their perception of the pressure, which is which. So it's important to understand that if, and this again is going back to my original premise, and that's that if you don't teach negative reinforcement as a language, positive punishment is completely unfair because the dog doesn't have the ability to perceive those same things at a lower level. So teaching negative reinforcement properly is super, super, super important. So let's write the flow of how all this stuff works because I want you guys to kind of see this. So let's call it stimulus, any stimulus. So stimulus is just simply any outside force to your dog. So that can be, a stimulus can be like hearing the wind blow, that's a stimulus. Seeing a car drive by, that's a stimulus. Mom saying sit, that's a stimulus. So it's any neutral or outside thing that your dog hears or experiences, okay? After the stimulus, we are going to get some sort of behavioral response. So the dog is going to do something. You say sit, and they're going to look at you and turn in a circle. Or you say sit, and they're going to sit. Or you say sit, and they're going to run and scoot their butt across a rug. Who knows what they're going to do? But they're going to give us some sort of behavioral response. Then after that behavioral response, it is our choice to reinforce or punish. Now, what the reinforcement is or the punishment is not our choice. That's the dog's choice, right? But at that moment, we can decide, okay, I like that behavioral response. I can make it valuable so it comes back. Or we can decide I didn't like that behavioral response. I can decrease the value of that through a punisher, and the behavioral response shouldn't return, okay? So this is the process of learning for the dog. Stimulus, behavioral response, and then reinforce or punish, okay? So this is kind of a layout of exactly why we utilize the quadrants of operant conditioning. And just to kind of complete this thought and carry it all the way through, what can be used as a negative punisher? anything that is in the reinforcement, positive reinforcement quadrant by taking it away. Removing food, removing toy, removing praise, removing exercise. Okay, so here's where we see stuff like this. And then, of course, playing and freedom, all that stuff can be also used as a positive reinforcement or a negative punishment. The big thing I want you to get here is understand that these quadrants are not designed to be used independently. Look at the way it's designed. Food can be both a positive reinforcement and a negative punishment. These two quadrants are supposed to be used together. Look at the way it's designed. Audible pressure, no, can be considered either a negative reinforcer or a positive punisher, depending on how the dog views the perception of it. These two quadrants are designed to be used together. So any trainer that eliminates one set or multiple sets of these quadrants clearly does not understand how an animal learns. So to kind of tie all this together, that's the whole thing you should really be grasping from this, is that really training a dog well involves flowing in and out of all four quadrants and teaching them to understand both consequences and reinforcers for the behaviors that you're looking to improve in the dog or remove from the dog. I think that was everything on that. Yep, I think that was everything. All right, on to the next one.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon.